All right, so you sent over this chapter on humanistic psychology and the science of happiness. And we're going to try to unpack the whole thing for you. Looks like you're after a pretty thorough explanation of like the big theories, the research on,
Yeah.
even some real-world examples.
Yeah, it seems like you want to get like a deep dive into everything this chapter has to offer.
You've definitely come to the right place for that.
So one thing that really jumps out from this chapter is how it tackles what makes humanistic psychology so unique.
Yeah.
Right away, it kind of pushes back on this idea that psychology should be approached like some kind of hard science, like physics or chemistry.
Right from the start, it's making you think differently.
Exactly.
I like how it uses this analogy. Imagine a psychologist is studying a rock. The rock isn't going to have any opinions about the experiment, but you brought your whole self to the table.
Yeah, you bring all your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences.
And that's kind of what humanistic psychology is all about.
Exactly. It's about understanding each person's individual world, how they see things, how they experience things.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. Phenomenology.
Yeah.
Not the easiest word to say. But the idea itself is pretty straightforward, right?
Absolutely. It's the idea that each person's subjective experience is valid and important. So we're not just looking at objective behavior, like how many times someone presses a button or something like that.
Yeah.
We're trying to understand the meaning people find in their lives.
So it's less about measuring reactions in a lab and more about understanding how each person interprets the world around them.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
And that kind of leads us to another big idea that comes up early in the chapter, existentialism.
Yeah.
This is a philosophy that's all about grappling with those big, sometimes uncomfortable questions of existence.
Right. The why are we here? What's the point of it all? Kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Can get pretty heavy.
It can. The chapter talks about this idea of thrownness, which is basically this idea that we're all kind of tossed into this world without a manual. And it's especially tough in today's world where so many traditional sources of meaning have lost their hold.
Yeah, like religion or...
Exact
Just-
tradition.
Yeah, so no wonder people feel a little lost sometimes.
So where do we go from there? How do we find meaning if it's not just handed to us?
Well, that's where things can get a bit tricky. The chapter talks about angst, that feeling of anxiety and uncertainty about life's purpose.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that can keep you up at night if you let it.
It can.
So how do we deal with this angst? Do we just ignore it?
Existentialists would say absolutely not.
Okay.
They argue that facing this angst head-on, accepting the uncertainty and limitations of life, is part of what makes us human.
So it's about leaning into the discomfort, not running from it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's where the idea of authentic existence comes in.
Okay.
It's about living a life true to yourself, even if it's hard.
But the chapter also warns against bad faith, right? What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, bad faith is basically the opposite of authenticity. It's about denying our freedom, ignoring those big questions, and distracting ourselves with superficial things. So like the existentialists are saying that we should avoid distractions and really confront what it means to be human.
Exactly.
But existentialism can feel a bit heavy, right?
Right.
Is there any room for optimism in all of this?
Absolutely. That's where things start to get a little brighter. The chapter introduces these two American psychologists, Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow,
Okay.
who bring a more positive spin to humanistic psychology.
Okay, tell me more about them. How do they fit into all of this?
Well, they agreed with the existentialists that individual experience and free will are super important, but they added this key idea. People are fundamentally good and driven to grow.
So we're not just like wandering around in a meaningless void.
Not according to Rogers and Maslow.
Okay.
They believed that we all have this inner drive to become the best versions of ourselves.
So how do we reach that? Is there a map?
Well, Rogers believed it all starts with unconditional positive regard, especially in childhood.
Okay.
That means receiving love and acceptance no matter what, which allows us to develop a healthy sense of self-worth and pursue our full potential.
So feeling loved and accepted gives you the confidence to grow.
Exactly.
What about Maslow?
Yeah, so Maslow is probably best known for his hierarchy of needs.
Right.
You can think of it like a pyramid, with the most basic needs at the bottom.
Okay.
Things like food, water,
The
shelter.
essentials.
Exactly. And then more complex needs building on top of that.
So we need to take care of the basics before we can focus on anything else.
Exactly.
Yeah, makes sense.
Maslow argued that you can't really reach self-actualization until those lower level needs are met. You're not going to be thinking about philosophy and art if you're starving or feeling unsafe.
Right, right.
Right.
So this pyramid applies to things like career choices too.
Absolutely.
The chapter mentions that.
Yeah, someone whose basic needs are met might be more likely to choose a career based on passion and purpose rather than just financial security.
And also things like employee motivation.
Yeah,
Makes you think about it from the management perspective, too.
absolutely. Imagine trying to motivate someone who's worried about putting food on the table. They're not going to be too focused on exceeding their sales quota.
Right.
So good managers understand how these basic needs can influence their employees' performance.
So far, we've covered phenomenology, existentialism, and the optimistic humanism of Rogers and Maslow. Feels like we've already traveled through a whole history of psychology. Where does this deep dive take us next?
Well, now we're getting into the really fascinating world of George Kelly and his theory of personal constructs.
Okay.
It's all about how each of us creates our own unique lens for viewing the world.
Here's where things get really interesting. The chapter talks about how we're all like little scientists running around, gathering data from our experiences and forming theories about how things work.
Exactly. Kelly called these theories personal constructs.
Yeah.
They're like mental filters that shape how we see and interpret everything.
So even if two people have a very similar experience, they might understand it in completely different ways
Precisely.
based on their personal constructs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kelly's theory really emphasizes that we have a choice in how we interpret our experiences. The chapter gives an example of someone who had a tough childhood. They could conclude the world is a cruel place, or they could focus on their resilience. It all depends on how they choose to frame it.
That's really empowering.
It is.
We're not just passive recipients of whatever life throws at us.
Exactly.
I like that.
And that brings us to a key concept in Kelly's theory: constructive alternativism.
Okay.
It means that there are always multiple ways to interpret any experience.
The chapter even says that scientific paradigms are just frameworks for interpreting data.
Yeah.
It's not always about finding the one right answer, but understanding the different lenses we use to make sense of the world.
Exactly.
Wow.
So Kelly believed that a therapist's role is to help clients explore alternative constructs, to try on different lenses and see which ones work best for them.
Interesting.
He even experimented with offering intentionally bizarre interpretations just to shake things up.
That's a pretty unconventional approach. Did it actually work?
Surprisingly, yes. Kelly found that the most important part of therapy wasn't the specific interpretation, but the process of challenging clients' existing constructs and helping them see new possibilities.
So it seems like Kelly was kind of a pioneer of cognitive therapy, even though he was working within this humanistic framework.
Absolutely. His work really laid the groundwork for later approaches that focus on changing our thought patterns.
This is also fascinating. We've gone from the depths of existentialism to the empowering idea of personal constructs. What else can you tell me about this unique approach to understanding the human experience?
Well, one of the most exciting developments in recent decades has been the rise of positive psychology. It kind of builds on many of the core principles of humanistic psychology, but with a renewed focus on scientific research.
So it's like humanistic psychology got a 21st century makeover?
Exactly.
I like that.
Positive psychology really shifts the focus from dwelling on problems to understanding what makes life worth living.
So instead of just trying to fix what's broken, positive psychology looks at how we can cultivate happiness, meaning, and well-being.
Exactly. And the chapter points out that this shift in perspective was a long time coming. For decades, humanistic psychology was kind of fading into the background, but positive psychology has brought many of its key ideas back into the spotlight.
Right, like it was a much-needed reminder that psychology shouldn't just be about studying dysfunction.
Exactly. And positive psychology has gone beyond simply reviving old ideas. It's doing rigorous research on things like happiness, meaning in life, character strengths, and all the factors that contribute to a flourishing life.
So it sounds like it's really bridging the gap between philosophical inquiry and scientific methodology.
Absolutely.
Cool.
One of the areas where positive psychology has made some really significant contributions is in the study of virtues.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about different cultures having different ideas about what's considered good?
Right. That was back when we were discussing existentialism.
Yeah.
Different cultures having different morals and values and stuff.
Exactly. Well, positive psychology researchers have been trying to identify virtues that seem to be valued across cultures throughout history.
Oh, so like universal principles of good character.
Exactly.
Okay.
The chapter mentions a study that looked at the writings of various philosophical and religious traditions, from Confucianism to ancient Greek philosophy to Islam.
Wow, that's quite a range. And what do they find?
Well, they identified 6 core virtues: courage, justice, humanity, temperance, wisdom, and transcendence.
It makes you wonder if these virtues are somehow hardwired into us. Maybe even rooted in our evolution.
Yeah, that's what some researchers suggest. They argue that these virtues might have helped our ancestors solve some crucial survival problems.
So like justice prevents chaos. Humanity prevents cruelty. Wisdom prevents stupidity.
Exactly. And the fact that these virtues show up in such diverse cultures suggests that they might tap into something fundamental about human nature.
Right. It's like a blueprint for a flourishing society,
Yeah.
but also for flourishing individuals.
In a way, yes.
Cool.
And speaking of flourishing, positive psychology also focuses on happiness.
Right.
Remember, that's a big part of what this chapter is exploring.
We can't talk about positive psychology without talking about happiness.
Exactly.
What does this field have to say about it?
Well, first of all, it defines happiness as having three main components. Overall satisfaction with life satisfaction, with specific areas like relationships and careers, and high levels of positive emotions combined with low levels of negative emotions.
That sounds like a pretty well-rounded definition.
Sure.
It covers both the big picture and the day-to-day experience of feeling good.
Right.
So where does this happiness come from?
Well, positive psychology acknowledges that our genes play a role.
Okay, so some people are just born luckier.
It does seem that way. Research has shown that there's a genetic component to our happiness set point, which is kind of a baseline level of happiness that we tend to return to even after experiencing ups and downs.
But that doesn't mean we're stuck with a predetermined level of happiness, right?
Of course not. While genetics might set the stage, our life circumstances and our own intentional actions also have a huge impact.
So we're not just tuppets of our DNA.
Exactly. The chapter really emphasizes that we have a lot more control over our happiness than we might think.
That's encouraging. So what kind of actions are we talking about? What can we actually do to boost our happiness?
Well, positive psychology research suggests that things like expressing gratitude, doing acts of kindness, and pursuing meaningful goals can all increase our happiness levels.
So it's like we can train ourselves to be happier.
In a way, yes.
But what about the flip side? Are there any downsides to happiness? Can you be too happy?
That's a really interesting question. The chapter actually touches on that.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, it turns out that there can be some potential downsides to excessive happiness or to feeling happy at inappropriate times.
Right. Like if you're feeling super happy while your house is burning down, that might be a problem.
That's a bit extreme, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
The chapter mentions research suggesting that overly intense happiness can lead to risky behavior or make us less likely to recognize problems.
So a healthy dose of realism is still important.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And there's also this idea that constantly chasing happiness can actually backfire.
It's like that old saying, the more you chase happiness, the more it eludes you.
Exactly. Sometimes it's better to focus on living a meaningful life, and happiness will naturally follow.
That makes a lot of sense. But overall, it seems like happiness has a ton of positive effects.
It does. The chapter highlights research showing that happier people tend to be more successful in various areas of life, from their careers to their relationships.
So happiness isn't just a fleeting feeling. It's actually a powerful force that can shape our lives for the better.
Exactly.
Oh.
And one of the most fascinating findings is that happiness can become a self-perpetuating cycle.
How so?
Well, when we're happy, we tend to engage in more positive behaviors, which leads to more positive outcomes, which reinforces our happiness and so on.
It's like a virtuous cycle.
Precisely. And that's why positive psychology emphasizes the importance of not just experiencing happiness, but actively cultivating it through our choices and actions.
Wow, this has been an incredible journey so far. We've explored like phenomenology, existentialism, self-actualization, personal constructs, positive psychology.
Yeah.
It feels like we've covered a whole semester of psychology in just a few minutes.
I know, right? And we're not even done yet. There's still so much more to unpack in this chapter.
You're right. We've talked a lot about individual growth and happiness, but there's another important aspect of humanistic psychology we need to explore: understanding other people.
So we're shifting gears from focusing on ourselves to understanding those around us.
Exactly. Humanistic psychology places a huge emphasis on seeing the world through another person's eyes, really trying to grasp their unique perspective.
It makes sense, especially given all this talk about phenomenology and personal constructs. We've already established that everyone sees the world differently.
Exactly.
The chapter uses that classic saying, "Don't judge someone until you've walked a mile in their shoes." It's a reminder that we can't truly understand another person's actions or beliefs unless we try to see things from their point of view.
So it's about moving beyond judgment and cultivating a deeper understanding of others. But how do we actually do that? It sounds great in theory, but putting it into practice seems like a whole other challenge.
Well, the chapter suggests that it starts with recognizing that there's no single right way to see the world. Each person's perspective is shaped by their own experiences and personal constructs.
Right. It's like that idea of constructive alternativism we talked about earlier. There are always multiple ways to interpret any situation.
Right.
Right.
When we apply that principle to understanding other people, it encourages us to be more open-minded and less judgmental.
It's a good reminder that just because someone sees things differently from us doesn't mean they're wrong.
Exactly. And this principle extends to understanding different cultures, too. The chapter talks about the importance of cultural relativism, the idea that we shouldn't judge the values and practices of other cultures based on our own cultural norms.
So it's about recognizing that different cultures have different ways of making sense of the world, and those ways are equally valid.
Precisely. It's about approaching other cultures with curiosity and respect, rather than trying to impose our own values on them.
That's a powerful message, especially in today's increasingly interconnected world. It feels more important than ever to be able to understand and appreciate different perspectives.
It is, and it all comes back to that core principle of phenomenology. Each person's subjective experience is what matters most.
Like we're all living in our own unique worlds, shaped by our perceptions and interpretations.
And humanistic psychology encourages us to acknowledge and respect those individual worlds, even if they're very different from our own.
This is all so thought-provoking. I feel like this deep dive is giving me a whole new way of looking at myself, other people, and even the world around me. It's exciting and a little overwhelming at the same time.
I understand what you mean. It's a lot to take in. But that's the beauty of exploring these humanistic and positive psychology perspectives. They offer a different lens through which we can understand the human experience, one that emphasizes growth, meaning, and connection.
It's like a breath of fresh air, especially in a world that often feels so negative and divided.
I agree. And speaking of fresh air, one of the concepts that positive psychology has really brought to the forefront is the idea of mindfulness.
Mindfulness. I've heard that word everywhere lately, but I'm not sure I fully grasp what it means.
The chapter describes it as a state of being fully and consciously aware of your surroundings and your experiences in the present moment.
So it's about being present and engaged in whatever you're doing, rather
Yeah.
than letting your mind wander off to your to-do list or that embarrassing thing you said 5 years ago.
Exactly. It's about tuning into your senses, your thoughts, and your emotions without judgment or distraction.
It sounds a bit like meditation, but maybe without all the spiritual connotations. Is that a fair comparison?
You're on the right track. Mindfulness does have roots in Buddhist meditation practices, but it's becoming increasingly popular as a secular technique for reducing stress and improving well-being.
I can see why it would be helpful for stress. But the chapter also mentions that mindfulness has been shown to have other benefits like improving memory.
There's a growing body of research supporting the positive effects of mindfulness on both mental and physical health.
So it's not just a feel-good practice, there's actual science backing it up.
Exactly.
Interesting.
One of the key aspects of mindfulness is that it encourages us to observe our thoughts and emotions without getting swept away by them.
It's like creating some space between ourselves and our reactions so we can choose how to respond instead of just reacting automatically.
That's a great way to put it. And this ability to observe our thoughts and emotions without judgment is crucial for developing self-awareness and emotional regulation.
It sounds like a valuable skill, especially in today's world where things move so fast and it's easy to get caught up in the chaos. But honestly, sometimes it feels good to let go of all that self-awareness and just get lost in the moment.
I understand what you mean.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another fascinating concept from positive psychology. Flow. Flow. Is that like going with the flow? I'm picturing someone floating down a lazy river.
Not quite, although there are some similarities. Flow, as the chapter describes it, is a state of complete absorption in an activity that you find intrinsically rewarding.
So it's like being so engrossed in something that you lose track of time. Maybe that lazy river visual wasn't so far off after all.
Exactly. It's that feeling of being completely in the zone where your skills are perfectly matched to the challenges of the activity. I think I've definitely experienced that before, like when I'm working on a creative project or playing a challenging game. It's almost like entering another dimension where nothing else matters.
That's a great description of flow. And research suggests that flow is associated with a number of positive outcomes, including increased happiness, creativity, and performance.
It sounds like the ultimate state of focus and enjoyment.
It can be. And the chapter points out that flow can happen in a wide variety of activities, from playing sports to writing poetry to solving complex problems.
So it's not just limited to artists or athletes.
Not at all. Flow can occur anytime we're fully engaged in something that stretches our abilities and holds our attention. It's about finding those activities that make you lose yourself in the moment.
But I'm curious about how flow relates to mindfulness. They seem almost like opposite states of being. One is about being hyper-aware of the present moment, while the other is about losing yourself in an activity.
That's a sharp observation. The chapter does acknowledge this apparent paradox. It suggests that while mindfulness and flow might seem contradictory, they can actually complement each other.
So it's not an either situation, it's about finding a balance between the two.
Exactly. The chapter even offers this advice. Be mindful about when you're in flow.
So it's about enjoying the experience of flow, but also making sure it's aligned with your values and goals.
Precisely. Mindfulness can help us make sure we're not just blindly following impulses, but making conscious choices about how we spend our time and energy.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like getting the best of both worlds. The intense focus and enjoyment of flow combined with the self-awareness and intentionality of mindfulness.
Exactly. And this integration of mindfulness and flow is just one example of how positive psychology is building on the insights of humanistic psychology to create a more complete understanding of human well-being. It's about taking those core ideas and applying them in a way that's relevant and helpful in our everyday lives.
This deep dive has been incredible so far. We've explored so many concepts, but I have a feeling there's still more to come.
You're right. We've only just scratched the surface of this rich and complex field of study.
We've been on quite a journey with this deep dive.
Yeah.
From existentialism to personal constructs to flow. Feels like we've opened up this whole toolbox for understanding ourselves and others.
Yeah, it is fascinating how these different concepts all kind of weave together.
Hmm.
They each offer a unique perspective on what it means to be human and how we can live more fulfilling lives.
But with so many ideas swirling around, where do we go from here? How do we take all this knowledge and actually put it into practice?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and the answer is different for everyone. You know, the real journey begins when you start applying these insights to your own life. What stood out to you the most? What sparked your curiosity?
Honestly, it's hard to choose just one thing. The whole concept of personal constructs really resonated with me.
Yeah.
Like, it's so empowering to realize that we have a choice in how we interpret our experiences. It feels like a real shift in perspective.
It is a powerful shift. And that's a key takeaway from humanistic psychology, the power of choice and personal responsibility. We're not just victims of circumstance. We have the ability to shape our own realities.
I'm also really fascinated by the idea of flow. I've definitely experienced it before, but I never really thought about it in such a deliberate way. It makes me want to seek out more of those experiences where I can completely lose myself in what I'm doing.
Yeah, flow is incredibly rewarding, and it highlights the importance of finding activities that challenge us and engage us fully.
Yeah.
You know, finding that sweet spot where our skills meet the demands of the task.
And then there's mindfulness. I'm definitely intrigued by the idea of cultivating more awareness and presence in my daily life. It feels like a path to finding more peace and clarity amidst all the chaos.
It can be a truly transformative practice. It helps us manage stress, improve focus, and feel more connected to the present moment. You know, learning to observe our thoughts and emotions without judgment, creating space for greater understanding and acceptance.
It feels like we've been given all these different paths we can explore to create a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
Exactly. And humanistic psychology provides the framework for navigating those paths. It encourages us to ask those big questions, to explore our own inner world, and to find what truly resonates with us.
But it's not just about individual growth, is it? It also feels like a call to action, a challenge to create a more humane world.
You're absolutely right. Humanistic psychology emphasizes the importance of empathy, compassion, and respect for others' perspectives. It encourages us to see beyond ourselves and connect with others on a deeper level.
It's like a blueprint for building a more compassionate and understanding society, where we value each person's unique experience and strive to create a world where everyone can thrive.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And I think that's a fitting note to end our deep dive on.
This journey through humanistic psychology has been incredibly eye-opening. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of what it means to be human, both the challenges and the incredible potential.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. And remember, this is just the beginning. The exploration doesn't end here. There's always more to learn, more to discover, and more ways to grow. Take these insights with you and keep asking questions.
I definitely will. Thanks for guiding us through this fascinating world of humanistic psychology. It's been an incredible deep dive.
You're very welcome. And remember, the most important part of this journey is what you do with it. Go out there and make it your own.